Hype, hope, and reality. So hype, now a lot of you may know about the Gartner hype cycle. I think they invented this during the internet bubble. I'm not exactly sure when it was created, but forever we have known that investors get overly enthusiastic about technological and scientific breakthroughs, and they tend to have inflated expectations at the front end of a breakthrough. And so the point of the Gartner hype cycle is to warn both entrepreneurs and investors that sometimes we get, as we say, out over our skis, a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of what it's going to take to turn a scientific breakthrough into a commercial success. So the point of the hype cycle is not that a technology that is overhyped is doomed to failure. The point of the hype cycle is a technology that has tremendous promise may generate inflated expectations at the front end, which could create a backlash, which could destroy a bunch of entrepreneurs and investors along the way before that breakthrough generates a commercial success. So, not every technology that is hyped is necessarily a bad technology or a failure, but we do have examples of so every once in a while, we get a technology that gets overhyped and it turns out it is fraudulent. So, okay, so you got to be careful as an investor or as an entrepreneur in terms of sort of believing everything you hear out there. But having said that, there are most of the things that get overhyped are perfectly great scientific and technological breakthroughs. It's just that they take a lot longer to deliver on the promise. And so sort of going back, roughly, 20 years or so, I could go back much further, but I didn't have time or room. But in terms of, scientific breakthroughs that we saw and we went, wow, this is incredible. This is going to change the world, right? The human genome. When we cracked the human genome, wow, that was going to change everything, because all of a sudden we were going to have the ability to find targeted drugs that were going to absolutely specifically address all sorts of diseases and illnesses. And, it's been brilliant understanding the human genome. It's contributed tremendously to a lot of progress in science and in technology, but it hasn't quite fulfilled the promise that we had back then. Now, where we go from now, that's an interesting discussion. Stem cells, again, that burst on the scene as being unbelievably transformative. The state of California committed $3 billion. The state of Arizona committed, I can't remember what their number was. Governments were committing all sorts of funding for stem cell research because stem cells were going to change medicine as we knew it. And then on the more prosaic side, right? This isn't life science. This is just, my world, enterprise software, electronic medical records. It was obvious that digitizing medical records and making this information more accessible and available was going to transform the healthcare system. We've had some companies become massive successes financially, but in terms of delivering on the promise, life's a little bit better. I don't know, personalized medicine. So Dr. Lee pointed out, that this is the future. Well, it's been the future for the last 20 years, I think, right? It's been the future. It's, it's getting better. We're getting closer, but we got a little bit out ahead of ourselves. Wearables, sort of in the investor world, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, burst on the scene as being, initially trivial, monitoring your steps, but eventually, we can monitor all sorts of parameters. Absolutely a contribution. Was it breakthrough? Has it transformed medicine? Not quite yet. Gene therapy holds tremendous promise. It's really, really hard to make it work. And now more recently, AI for diagnostics and for diagnosis and drug discovery, again, burst upon the scene. We've seen a bunch of companies get tremendously well funded for implementing this. We've had just an unbelievable logjam in the FDA and the whole process of getting these from science, from lab to and science to actual implementation in our healthcare system. And finally, CRISPR, Nobel Prizes, unbelievable breakthrough in science, has absolutely already made contributions to a number of different areas. Did we overhype it? I don't know. Some of the funding going behind these companies has been extraordinary. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. So now the hope, the hype, the hope. The hope is that genomics will play out, that immunotherapy, which has had a lot of promise, that absolutely we're seeing lives saved, because finally it looks like immunotherapy is working. AI and CRISPR, and tremendous hope for how they're going to play out. So no question, they are very real and very important. mRNA burst upon the scene. You scientists and doctors, you've known about it for a long time. Sort of the investor community had no idea about mRNA until just recently. And then, of course, because of telehealth, because of COVID, telehealth has gone from being a promise, again, that we've talked about for a long, long time, and now all of a sudden it's become a necessity. And so the hope is that we will, in fact, be able to develop platforms and solutions to enable us to distribute health services more broadly, more equitably, not just in the United States, but around the world, thanks to the combination of, technology, the internet, and, the ability to distribute at-home diagnostics and other at-home tools. Dr. Lee mentioned the organoids. Seems like these are coming on the scene as, I don't think they ever got overhyped, because the investor community, I don't think saw organoids. There wasn't a lot of visibility on this corner of the life science universe. We've looked at a few companies in that space, which seem like they're extraordinarily promising. They wish they had gotten hyped. They never did quite get hyped from the investor point of view, but certainly they are now a hope. And then again, on the prosaic side, hospital management software, broadly defined, our hospitals are a mess. The way they get managed, the way patients get treated, the way that staff is managed, the way equipment is managed, it's just a nightmare. Are we going to get better? We have, between IoT and management software, it looks as though there is the possibility that we could get more efficient and better when it comes to the management of patient care in the hospital setting. So bunch of, and there are many, many more things that offer a lot of hope for the future of healthcare. And then finally, just touching on kind of our reality and what that means for all of us going forward. So, and again, Dr. Lee mentioned this, so we all experienced this. One of the most dramatic current realities about the health tech sector is the flood of money that is going into the space. So, which is triggered by this combination of factors, building up with things like CRISPR and AI and some of these other technologies, scientific breakthroughs that were emerging, that started this river of money going into healthcare and health tech. And then COVID, wham, right? So COVID comes along and everybody realizes, oh my gosh, there's an amazing opportunity here with all of this science that has been developed over the last 20 years to fund companies to take advantage of the science to transform our healthcare system and improve patient outcomes. So we are absolutely seeing this flood of money. Meanwhile, on the less appealing, the less positive side of our current reality, just tremendous inequalities in our healthcare system. I mean, we see this all the time. We hear this all the time. It's in the US, definitely, but absolutely all over the world. In terms of challenges that we face, we're making really interesting progress at the margins in a whole bunch of specific situations. But in terms of the mass of our healthcare system, it's not getting better. So that's definitely a challenge. The COVID pandemic obviously has thrown us all for a loop. That is a reality that has transformed everyone's life in some way or another. Interestingly, it has given a tailwind to a bunch of sectors like health tech. So the good news of COVID is it's provided a tailwind. The bad news, of course, is the negative impact it's had on so many people, so many businesses. And interestingly, it's also had this negative impact on what we've seen with some of our companies is if you're going into the FDA process and you're not COVID oriented, then you have been put on a side burner. And so COVID is actually delaying some of the progress in some sectors of healthcare. Unfortunately, this COVID thing has wound up hurting the CDC's reputation. CDC was the gold standard for understanding healthcare, around the world. I don't know if they'll recover and how that will evolve. FDA as well. I think FDA has been less damaged. It depends on where you're sitting as to whether or not you feel confidence in the FDA. Obviously, politically in the United States, tremendous damage has been done. And of course, our reality is that, our medical insurance system is still a disaster. And in addition to having been politicized. So overall, if we're thinking about the future of healthcare in the United States and around the world, so much of it depends upon attitudes and behaviors, not just science and technology. And to paraphrase a comment on the software hardware world, for those of you in the investor space, you've probably heard the phrase that software is eating the world. You've probably heard Peter Drucker's phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, what we know is that human behavior eats healthcare technology for lunch. For all of our investments in technology and in science, if we can't crack the human behavior nut, from individual responsibility through political responsibility, we're not going to make a lot of progress. So that's what I would argue is the current, landscape in healthcare technology. My name is Bill Reichert. You can find me at Pegasus. Look forward to the panel discussion at the end.